Welcome back to Reimagine 2021. I am Yonah Hochhauser. Today I'm glad to be joined by Kwon, co-founder and CEO of Terraform Labs. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a really pleasure to speak to you because I am familiar with some of your work, but for our guests who might not be familiar with who you are, you want to give a little background, kind of who you are and how you got into blockchain?
Sure. So as Yonah introduced, I'm Do. I studied computer science at Stanford, and then I was an NLP engineer at Microsoft for a little while. I was working on a startup through some of my side work at the company, working in Wi-Fi mesh networks. So the technology involved connecting lots of user devices over Wi-Fi direct to Bluetooth, such that in densely populated areas, largely B2B settings like amusement parks, airports, where we sold turnkey networking solutions, users could connect to the internet via hopping through a network of other users, even if they didn't have direct access to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So during some of my work doing that, came across cryptocurrencies throughout some of my research. But really, when I started to get really interested in the space was when an old friend from college randomly invited me to this Facebook chat group that had about 8 people, and they were talking, almost all the time about things like Ethereum, Monero, Bitcoin, which I was loosely interested in. But it was only after meeting that group for a little bit, and then finally capitulating, and then reading through and studying, all the really interesting things that they were saying, that I got super interested into crypto and started spending more and more time in the space. And then so did that for a while, and then started to evaluate lots of ICOs, white papers, models, and different things like that, and spending more time virtually within communities rather than face-to-face with real people at bars and things like that. And that's sort of how I got sucked into crypto. And then finally jumped in full-time when I founded Terra Money towards the end of 2017 with my co-founder Daniel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting that you come from the networking world, because right now when we look at crypto, and for much of its history, we view it through this financial lens. It's this type of money, and that's what cryptocurrencies are. But overall, as a blockchain, and in essence, also cryptocurrencies, they're essentially networks. They're networks of computers, whether it's powering CPU for a vote, or whether it be staking or other different networks. It's essentially advanced network technology. And how much of it, when you were coming in, when you found out about blockchain and crypto, how much of it were you looking at it from kind of this financial lens, and how much of it were you, because of your background kind of in this network and communication, was it like, wow, this is actually a really cool, interesting way of securing a network and connecting different nodes?
Yeah, so I think a lot of my work in sort of networking definitely influenced how I sort of view the monetary policies of a lot of these different networks. And if you think about it, like a monetary network is no different from, let's say, a TCP/IP network, right? So for example, in TCP, you have this thing called AMMD, whereby it's called additive, so AIMD, so which is additive increase, multiplicative decrease, which means that whenever a network line is being congested, you start to increase the throughput that you put on that wire. Whereas, when you need to decrement, you sort of slash by half the amount that needs to come through. And in monetary networks, really that sort of congestion control, you have that all the time, right? So in stock markets, when prices are falling too fast, you have things like circuit breakers to make sure that they don't fall at a pace that is not rational, right? And then vice versa for when things are going up. So a lot of the incentive mechanisms that we've built out throughout our monetary systems is analogous to how we deal with packets and bits of data.
Mm-hmm. But in a lot of ways, we're missing in this kind of unregulated, brand new economy, or kind of alternative economy that we built here. There are no circuit breakers. I mean, at least in the main network. So Bitcoin doesn't have a circuit breaker. Is that a vulnerability? or is that actually a positive in this space?
Yeah, so that's some of the things that's really interesting, right? So in the initial versions of how people built networks, so if you look at the initial implementations of the Wi-Fi protocol, for instance, a lot of the safeguards that are not present in some of the newer standards like AC weren't present when Wi-Fi was first coming out, right? Which is, led to performance degradation and issues where, depending on the network profile of the areas in which it was operational, like you had worse network quality. But I think, like even DeFi, right? So if you look at DeFi, I would say that's like more analogous because you have financial primitives that are playing with each other. More and more protocols are starting to build in safeguards such that total failure scenarios don't happen. So for example, a lot of protocols are building in circuit breakers of their own, just in case like the underlying oracles themselves are not able to push votes in real time. A lot of different protocols like Aave, for instance, or Compound have sort of insurance funds that you'll find in sort of centralized exchanges like BitMEX or Binance. Just to make just cognizant of the fact that there might be situations in which the core mechanisms don't work well as they were originally designed to do. Maker, for instance, has a mechanism by which I think they call it global settlement, whereby you can issue new units to re-collateralize DAI in case systems fail. And I think movement in that direction is definitely positive for DeFi and crypto as an industry.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of your accomplishments because there are many quite impressive. You are one of Forbes Asia's 30 under 30, which really incredible if you're looking at the scope of things. And like you mentioned, you started Terra. You want to give us a little overview of kind of what you guys do at Terra?
Sure. So at Terra, our central focus is to try to grow crypto adoptions, looking outwards rather than inwards. So I would say the core thing that differentiates Terra from most other crypto projects is, kind of different from 2017. If you looked at 2017, there were lots of things that were being conceived, but very few things useful that was actually being built. In 2021, the difference is there's a lot of useful things that are being built out, but sort of in this closed mode of DeFi and crypto. So it's like you assume a lot about the user that you're building things for. So you have tons and tons of different yield farming opportunities, DeFi protocols, tools that's supposed to make the life of the crypto trader easier. But there aren't too many projects that are focusing on how to bring the next 10 million people into crypto. Right. So I would say that's the one thing that differentiates us more than compared to other crypto projects. We tend to look outwards. So initially, when we first started the project, our focus was to build a payments network utilizing our stablecoins that could span across tens of millions of users and have billions of dollars in transaction volume. And the reason why we could aspire to those things was because my co-founder, Daniel Shin, was one of the first entrepreneurs to bring e-commerce to Korea. So he founded companies such as Timon, which is today one of the largest e-commerce companies in the country. He also founded Fast5, which is the largest share office company in the country. And sort of that generation of entrepreneurs in that network, founded, let's say, Carousel in Singapore, which is the largest C2C platform, Tiki in Vietnam, the largest e-commerce platform. So we sort of, cobbled together something called the Terra Alliance, 15 e-commerce companies or so that were each, worth, above $1 billion, servicing tens of millions of users and so on and so forth. So the idea was that we would sort of build a pan-Asian alliance of different e-commerce companies that would transact using our stablecoin. Our aspirations have grown a little bit since then. So we work on a number of different verticals besides payments. So in payments, we have 3 different payment companies running across Korea and Mongolia today. We have the Mirror Protocol, which is a new synthetics protocol that creates tokens tracking the price of various types of US equities and soon expanding to different types of asset classes. We have Ankr Protocol, which is supposed to create a stable, attractive yield to be sort of the reference interest rate across all of crypto. But what sort of animates our efforts across all 3 of these different verticals is that we're trying to solve problems for people that are outside of crypto, right? So for example, for synthetics protocols, we're trying to give, like the person who doesn't have access to a licensed broker-dealer to be able to purchase price exposure to US equities as an asset class. For Ankr, we're looking to package this into a B2B SaaS API, whereby any type of fintech company or any type of mobile wallet can connect to this to earn a yield on unused user deposits.
Mm-hmm. And I think that what you guys are accomplishing is actually one of the toughest things to accomplish in the entire space. There's, like you mentioned, there's so many projects that are building things for crypto users, increasing scalability, and all these types of advanced functions. While not enough, I don't think, not enough focus is put upon bringing new users. So far, it seems like users or the bulk of mainstream users come in not when there's a new technology made, but rather they're following the price speculation. When there's a big bull run, that's when the users come in. And I would say there's one exception, and that's actually you guys. TriPay is in my eyes, potentially one of the real best world use cases today in terms of real world blockchain use. And how has it been so successful? Is it, like you mentioned, because of this philosophy that you guys had of bringing new users and this alliance that you made, this Pan-Asian alliance you made with e-commerce? Is it simply the groundwork you guys did, or is there something inherent in the South Korean market that made it so successful? Why have you succeeded where so many others have failed?
Sure. So I think so first of all, I think creating a use case around the crypto project is really, really hard. And that's because, as an entrepreneur, you're supposed to listen to your users, right? But when you run a crypto project, it's not really clear who your primary users are. Is it the people that's holding your coin, to whom arguably you have a fiduciary obligation to make sure that the token does well? Or is it the people that use your service? And those two things aren't necessarily aligned. There might be somebody that holds millions and millions of dollars worth of your tokens, but not use your service at all, right? So whose voice should you really listen to? So I would say that the reason why we were able to find product market fit in a highly competitive category of digital payments is because we focus squarely on things that sort of made digital payments broken in traditional finance. And the reason for that is it's not just a Korea problem, but it's more of a Pan-Asian problem, that settlements are really, really slow and expensive. Mm-hmm. So for example, like if you look at Japan, it takes around 7 to 9 days in order for a payment service to settle the dues to the merchant. In Korea, for instance, that's around 7 days. In Southeast Asia, on average, it's inching close to 2 weeks. So the reason why this is a problem is that unlike the West, where the merchants have more leeway with working capital, if you look at Asian freelancers or small businesses or restaurants, they don't have the luxury of waiting 2 weeks in order for payments to settle. So that's the reason why if you go to Singapore, none of the cabs want to take your credit card. They have to take cash. And it's not because they have an inherent preference for cash. It's not because they're necessarily interested in evading taxes, right? It's because they need, when they get paid, they need the fare right away to be able to put food on their family's plate and to be able to buy fuel for next day arrives. So in essence, slow settlements has been one of the greatest roadblocks to digital payments being adopted more widely through the Asian region. And that's where we potentially found the solution.
What's the settlement time for a TriPay?
6 seconds.
Wow, that's from 6 days to 6 seconds is quite the improvement.
That's a big deal. So if you look at platforms where that really like Chai, they really appreciate the fact that it offers lower transaction fees. So for example, we sort of weaved out all the different settlements middlemen that sort of intervene in the process of getting the money to the merchants, and we settle to the merchant directly throughout Terra's own network. So the main benefit of this is that number one, you're able to charge lower fees. So the market rate is anywhere between 2.7% to 3.3. We slashed that down to somewhere around 1.3 to 1.5%. That's half what the rest of the market is charging. It's a big deal in a case where the e-commerce merchants are all combating with each other at razor thin margins. So a 1% difference could make the difference between life and death for the e-commerce platform. Mm-hmm. Also, if you settle faster, a lot of the platforms like food delivery or like online groceries, where It's not the platform that's doing direct to consumer. It's just an intermediary between, lots of smaller merchants and vendors that do business with consumers. Then in that case, it's hugely popular because it makes business models that wasn't possible before possible.
Wow. I mean, listen, you've essentially taken the task that everyone's been saying, when are people going to start actually utilizing the blockchain technologies when they don't realize it's blockchain, when just the application that they're using is quicker, faster, and better, and they don't care what's behind the scenes. And you've essentially done that. You've actually done the thing that everyone's been trying to do. So in terms of the UI, UX, in terms of just the experience, if I'm going to the grocery store, I pay with my Tripe Pay, and I go home. That's a seamless experience. Do I have to open up a wallet? Are people, do people even realize that there's blockchain behind it, or is this just like, hey, there's this new app called Tripe Pay, and they're just running along with it?
It's entirely invisible because the crypto component comes in throughout the settlement.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so that's really incredible. Now, you mentioned a couple of other things. You guys didn't just stop at the great success. For many that would be enough, really creating such an amazing market. And by the way, what is you think your market share in South Korea for Tripe Pay in terms of payment?
Sure. So Chai is integrated with about 50 of the largest e-commerce merchants in the country. It's currently doing about $1.5 billion in annualized transaction volume, and is servicing about 2.5 million users. 750,000 of those are monthly active. And we recently acquired a payment gateway called Import. So unlike a standalone e-wallet, it just helps the merchant to integrate with a lot of different payment options. So this company services 1,700 merchants and is processing $3.2 billion in transactions. We closed 2020 with around $5 billion in transactions between Chai e-wallet, the Chai card, and Import. So this would roughly put us in third place in Korea's list of digital payment vendors. Number one being Naver Pay, owned by the largest search engine. Second, Kakao Pay, by the largest messenger. And third, sort of the Chai family of payment solutions. It's quite exciting and it's growing pretty fast. We recently raised a $70 million Series B. So cumulative fundraising for Chai only being $88 million to date from the likes of SoftBank, Hana, which is one of the largest conglomerates in the country, as well as some other institutions.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's also great to hear that even kind of the traditional, traditional financial banks like SoftBank and all these others are recognizing the potential here, and that I think that's a testament to what you've been able to accomplish in your vision. So kudos to you again. Now, you guys aren't just resting on your laurels. You said you guys are thinking bigger. You mentioned Mirror and Ankr. Let's tackle those as well. What is Mirror?
So Mirror is a synthetics protocol whereby you can issue a token that tracks the price of almost anything. So you can have a token that follows the price of, let's say, a gram in steel, right? You can have something that tracks the price of an ETF, a single stock, a different cryptocurrency, an inverse price signal of that cryptocurrency, almost anything. Initially, Mirror Protocol started out with 13 of some of the most popular equities in the United States. And that's because there are tons of people. It's a very attractive asset class because US companies lead the world in innovation. And therefore, its equities are really compelling and attractive. Most have the means to buy proper price exposure to these assets. And Mirror Protocol fixes that problem.
Mm-hmm. Now, what kind of Oracle system are you using? Where is the Mirror Protocol actually getting the price data for all these various synthetic assets?
Sure. So the first 13 equities use the Band Protocol Oracle, but as new assets are being whitelisted, the proposer can include any Oracle vendor to be the designated Oracle for that particular asset, which means that you might be able to see assets that, once again, are serviced by Band Oracles, but also Chainlink. Let's say, are there others? Maybe
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's say,
Every
yeah,
day it
let's
seems like
say
they
they
pop
are
a
the
new one.
ones.
Yeah.
Arbitrary set of oracles. Yes.
Okay. All right. And once again, you've shown a really keen eye for what the local market is looking for, because kind of the context to this, South Korea actually has very high, I believe it's capital gains tax on foreign assets. So someone might ask, hey, why don't they just go and buy the exposure directly to the equity? And for those who don't know, South Korean market, there is very high capital gains tax on foreign assets, while domestic assets have a much lower tax rate. So therefore, if they were buying the synthetic asset, they would be paying that lower capital gains. Correct?
Yeah. So I mean, it's not just a South Korea problem, but generally most regulators try to prevent capital flight from domestic equity markets to foreign equity markets. I mean, just to think about things in simple terms, if you had the option of purchasing Tesla and you had the option of purchasing Hyundai, most people would buy Tesla, right? So if these equities were trading on par, there would be massive capital flight going out to foreign markets. So usually these regulations are designed to be adversarial to prevent too many people from trading foreign equities. So to put things in context, foreign equities tax, capital gains tax in Korea and Japan is 26%, which means, and it's single stocks. So even if you made money on Apple stock and then lost money on Google, you would still be taxed on your gains on Apple stock. So even if your portfolio is negative, you would still be taxed. But the funny thing is, crypto itself is not taxed. So you actually don't have to pay any taxes for buying mirrored assets on Mirror. So it's a great thing because you can trade 24/7. There's fractional ownership. You can buy up to a millionth of a stock, and then there's no tax implications, at least for now. And then this is a similar case throughout most of Asia, markets where we have a pretty good understanding.
Right, that's incredible. I mean, I didn't even know that there was a no tax rate on that. I mean, you really highlighted just another amazing use case. I talk to a lot of projects here, and it's so refreshing to speak to someone who's literally just actually putting into practice, into real world use, better, faster, cheaper, because that's all that anyone really cares about. They don't want to hear about blockchain. They want a solution that's better, faster, cheaper. And this is just another market we've done it. So once again, I'm taking my hat off to you. Kudos to you, Joe, once again. All right, let's try 3 for 3. Tell me about Ankr Protocol.
Yeah, so Ankr is, quite simply a savings protocol. And the idea was when, Compound first started to roll out, I was checking out a lot of their functions and it was, super interesting, right? The how they calculate the lending rate is super elegant, and how they've sort of pulled together all the different money markets into one clean interface was absolutely mind-blowing. I think the problem, though, is that while it was interesting to me from an academic perspective, this wasn't really usable for somebody that is just trying to get savings yield from Compound, right? So it's very suitable for somebody that is looking to speculate in crypto. So park capital for a little while when yields are high, run a bot to withdraw when yields are low, borrow by collateralizing on Ether when you think there's a leverage opportunity, wind that down when you think you need to short the markets. But for the average user, they don't want to do any of those things. All they want to do is that they want to park stablecoin or ideally dollars into some accounts, and they want to know what they're going to get for the next 5 years, which is not possible with the crypto protocol because interest rates are too volatile. And most importantly, there isn't like an interface that you can use where you can just reliably park capital. So, and the reason for that is because interest rates on Compound and Aave and other DeFi protocols are powered by leverage, demand for leverage on ERC20 tokens like wrapped Ether, BAT, and different things like that. So whenever the demand for that leverage collapses, so does the interest rate. So empirically speaking, you would see interest rates spike to 12%, and then it would drop down to like 0% and then be super volatile thereafter. So Ankr solves this problem by tapping into the staking rewards of major POS protocols in order to power a stable and reliable yield. So what do I mean by this? If you look at blockchains, especially when Ethereum is heading towards POS, the largest source of wealth is always going to be the block reward. In Bitcoin itself, the single user group that probably makes the most money is the Bitcoin miner. In Ethereum, DeFi, right? The person that benefits the most when DeFi markets are hot is not the average DeFi yield farmer, but is the Ethereum miner, right? So the block reward and the attendant inflation that powers it is the single greatest source of wealth across all different blockchains. So when Ethereum goes to POS, there's going to be $20 billion of staking rewards that are printed every single year that is not being put to productive use. It just goes to compensate the waste of electricity in, let's say, Bitcoin or other things, or in some sense, just parking staking tokens across different networks. Mm-hmm. So how Ankr solves this problem is that when a user deposits stablecoin, a portion of those stablecoins are used to acquire staking positions across different POS networks, like Ethereum, like Terra, like Cosmos, like Algorand, like Solana. And then the staking rewards that accrue to those positions are conferred to the user in the form of a stable yield. The reason why things can be more stable is because the monetary policies of most blockchains is fixed. So tokens are being printed at a fixed rate. So through Ankr, you get to have a principally protected account whereby you're getting exposure to a diversified stream of fixed monetary policies coming from various different ecosystems. Mm-hmm. Sort of further to this, why Ankr is interesting is we're wrapping this into a B2B SaaS SDK. So we're basically trying to position ourselves as the Stripe for savings. If Stripe's tagline was add payments to your app in 7 lines of code or less, Ankr's tagline will be add savings to your app in 7 lines of code or less. So it's going to support a number of different SDKs whereby neobanks and fintech applications can hook up to the Ankr API to earn yield on users' deposits.
Wow. And so essentially it's kind of a staking pool, kind of where everyone's pooling their money and it will stake in various blockchains. Very cool. Do you guys have an idea of what the target APY will be?
We're thinking somewhere around 7 to 9%. 7
to 9%. And like you mentioned, you kind of want to be the set standard for this interest rate. And that's really nice compared to the traditional interest rates you could find in traditional finance right now, which are very low. 7 to 9% is really high. And if this is stable, if it's easy to use, you don't really need real crypto knowledge to utilize it. And I'm assuming that it'll be pretty easy integration with the Chai Pay wallets and whatnot. So you already have all those users and capital to go in. I could also see this being a massive success. When does this launch?
We did a code freeze a couple weeks ago. It's underway in audit right now. So once it completes, we'll launch with a well-known partner.
Mm-hmm. And could you see that this really taking over as a go-to savings account instead of someone just parking their money in the bank? Especially like you said, in foreign markets where one, people want to keep their money in dollars for that stability, and two, they're looking for kind of higher interest rates. Can you see this really becoming the go-to savings account, essentially replacing the old, bank interest loan saving account?
Yeah, so what I would say is that this is sort of like the moment, the inflection point where it allows fintech to become the bank, right? So before, fintech used to service a lot of different functions, but it was never able to solve the problem of yield. Because that yield, in order to get yield, you need a privileged access to central banking, right? Whereas like you need to get the proper licensing and different things like that. But it was very difficult for fintech apps to be able to turn on that functionality. With Ankr, without any of those things, you're able to turn on yield for your users at a rate that commercial banks simply cannot match. Wells Fargo until 2023 is not going to be able to offer interest rates above 1%. Right. So that's just not going to happen. So the macro environment is highly friendly towards what we're trying to do here. So that's sort of like one. The second line of questioning that I usually get is, with DeFi yields offering 20,000%, isn't 7 to 9% really low? So first, 20,000% yield is not a real thing. Like you're never going to be able to stake to something for over a year and actually get 200x your capital. That's just not going to happen. Number two, the goal isn't for this to compete with DeFi. It's to become a new primitive for DeFi, right? So you can have a stable coin that retains value, and with a stable, attractive interest rate of 7 to 9%, if that gets hooked up to a lot of different DeFi protocols, then it becomes much more interesting than in, say, building something over Tether or USDC or even DAI.
That's very cool. I like the idea that the primitive being used is in itself collect interest instead of having to build a primitive that's base and then put interest collecting above it. That's very cool. But you know, another side of this, if you're collecting a massive pool of money that then goes to be staked on blockchains, then that gives you tremendous power over these blockchains. You guys will essentially be controlling a large stake in many blockchains. Do you intend to kind of do you guys intend, what would be the staking strategy? I mean, listen, whoever's controlling this massive pool, does get to choose, the validators and whatnot. Do you intend to also on the back end also then start become validators, nominators, and all types of the other utilities of staking and more active staking, if you would?
Yeah. So on the protocol level, Ankr is fully non-custodial. So the user could technically specify which validator they would like to stake tokens to. And if it's unspecified, it just gets split across all the different validators in the system. But you can sort of think about the stake that Ankr accumulates over time as sort of non-voting shares, right? Because everything happens through a set of Ankr smart contracts, which doesn't participate in governance, which doesn't take any preference towards any specific validator, and different things like that. So you can sort of think about it as equity that the company happens to be holding themselves. So for example, if there was hypothetical Avraham company, then these would be non-voting shares that are held directly by the company.
Well, I really like, you didn't mention, it's non-custodial. I could actually, if I want to maintain my keys, I could still be part of the Ankr protocol, getting those stakes while still holding my keys? Yeah,
so for most of the things that we build, all the protocols are fully non-custodial, fully decentralized. There's community pools that has people that are working off of decentralized grants and different things like that. But what we like to do is that we also like to build sort of a fintech wrapper on those things whereby the use cases of these protocols can be driven. So Ankr is similar. The protocol fully decentralized. There's just going to be a sexy little API wrapper on top of it that a lot of fintech houses can use. And that would have sort of a custodial centralized component.
Incredible. I can't wait. I'm excited. I've been looking for, besides all the DeFi DJ crazy, yield returns that aren't stable or realistic. I'm also, I think anyone who's in this space, just like if you had money in the traditional markets, you'd be looking for somewhere to keep it safe and have some stable returns that doesn't really exist in the traditional market. I think anyone who's actually in the crypto space is always looking for a place to, instead of hodl and have it just sit there, now today it's, you should hodl and have it work for you while you do so. And so I'm always looking for a good non-custodial and stable return. That I'm very excited for that. Now, in this whole space, you guys are developing a lot and getting quite amount of user base and use cases. And we're starting to see in the DeFi space, different projects take different approaches. And one of the most successful or most highly valued projects, but also that took a unique approach, is Yearn. Yearn did a fair launch, and Andre, lead dev Andre, he's had some thoughts about whether he regrets doing the fair launch or not. You build a successful project, and if you don't hold actually a lot of the coins, you're not getting properly incentivized to continue to build on it. So I don't know if you've been up to date. In the Yearn community, has been a recent debate about a new minting proposal to actually start minting more Wi-Fi to give to the devs to incentivize them to work. What are your thoughts? As this space evolves, we're still figuring out how to properly do things, but it seems like you're running pretty tight ship. You're doing very well. What are your thoughts on building a protocols in terms of fair launches and how to properly incentivize the development team that continues to build upon it? You mentioned your first thing out of your mouth in this conversation was balancing this idea of, do you build for the token holders or do you build for the potential users? So this kind of ties into that. What is your thoughts on, hey, you're building all these new protocols, how do you use it?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. So to sort of lean on our own experience, we've done both. So for Luna, the Terra project launched in 2018, 2019, where sort of you had more of these sort of startup-like token models where the developer team held a lot of those tokens and then figured out ways to distribute that to the community over time. For Mirror Protocol, which is a more recent launch last December, the governance token MIR was entirely fairly distributed. So the Terraform Labs took no tokens. There was no pre-mine. I received no tokens. I accept some that I bought from the market. So we've done both flavors of this. So the pros and cons are, so for the pros, you get a lot more community engagement if you do a fair launch, because there's a lot less administrative overhead, right? So there's no calls for transparency. Like nobody's trying to figure out whether like you're building the roadmap that they want you to do, because you gave away everything, right? So so like it doesn't make sense to ask for transparency when the founders didn't take anything. I think the downside of the fair launch model, though, is that unless like you can figure out a way in order to get the people that are working on the protocol to be successful alongside with you, then in that case, like you sort of end up in situations where the protocol can't keep growing, right? So right now, like it's a really exciting time, right? Like the token prices of everything is going up. Like a lot of the Yearn devs probably farmed a lot of EFI tokens, a lot of the new things that are being built on top of Yearn, just because of the social capital that's been accumulated, is likely going to do well. But crypto is extremely cyclical, right? So when markets aren't good and then things start to go south, are you going to have a core team that is going to stick around and double down on trying to make the protocol better for the next 3 to 5 years or even 10 years? And I think the jury's still out. We don't know what's going to happen, but my guess is that when the down cycle hits once again, a lot of the fair launch projects will disappear, not because the devs are dishonest, but they just wouldn't have sufficient tokens or enough of an upside to be able to pay the bills.
I mean, yeah, I don't understand. Listen, I think everyone accepts, in the traditional world, if someone makes a startup, people have no problem with them holding equity, even 100% equity, until they go public or whatever. And yet we have this double standard in the DeFi space or in the crypto space. I don't have a problem. Listen, you made this very successful Terra, you made Tripe. I have no problem. You put in the hard work. If you say, hey, I have 20% of ownership, I built this thing, now go use it. If you built this in the real world, you'd have 100% ownership. My personal stance on this, as long as it's open and it's transparent, how much you actually have, how much you actually took, I personally have no problem with it, because that's the incentive. That's how you incentivize people. How else you can incentivize entrepreneurship? Why would you go work so hard? Unless you're really out of the goodness of your heart. On one hand, but hey, that's just me. I don't actually build anything, so you really should not take my opinion in the matter. Now, one of these things you mentioned, this idea, especially for when it comes to Ankr, that things are slowly moving to proof of stake, and you said, even Ethereum, when Ethereum moves to proof of stake. Now we've heard about ETH 2.0 for such a long time, and I think it's pretty obvious that it's kind of, at least ETH 2.0 is a victim of Ethereum 1.0's success. We would have, if Ethereum 1.0 didn't have so much valuable assets locked on it, then we would have seen ETH 2.0, I think, a long time ago. They're taking their time because they say, hey, wait, we don't want to mess this up. We have hundreds of billions of dollars locked here. Let's not, rush anything and take our time. So do you think that we actually will see ETH 2.0, that we will see proof of stake, or will we just see, layer twos built upon ETH 1.0?
Yeah, so I think the only real difference between a sidechain building a bridge to Ethereum and or rather like a different L1 protocol. And Ethereum L2 is the ability to share some of the common tooling, like for example, like ENS, MetaMask. But if you think about it, like a Ethereum layer 2 is a different consensus engine that happens to export state to Ethereum's layer 1. So in that case, the major problem is that you sort of fragment usership and user experience across Ethereum's many different applications. And then if you buy into the premise that one L2 is going to rule everything on Ethereum, then in that case, that's kind of like where Ethereum is after that. So like all of DeFi moves to Matic, for instance, then Matic is a new Ethereum. And I don't know what Ethereum layer 1 is after that point. Is that something that like custodians use at that point? Is it just like a bunch of wallets that are legacy and nobody cares about? But yeah, so like essentially, I think the problem that a lot of L2s are going to face is going to be similar with a lot of problems that L1 is going to face. Is that in some sense, like you need to have the same issues with trying to grab market share, provide, gain some usership and different things like that. And I don't think that's going to, have too many network effects, if you will. So there's some issues with that. Yeah.
But so many people, when we say we're trying to use this blockchain as kind of this peer-to-peer monetary money, kind of like if you look at the Bitcoin white paper, Satoshi only mentions Bitcoin. He never mentions the word blockchain once the entire thing. He keeps on talking about peer-to-peer money. And then people are saying, oh, well, it can't scale, it'll never work, but you're actually pulling it off. You're actually, you are one of the biggest, like you said, the third largest, e-commerce payment methods in South Korea. How have you been able to scale your blockchain when no one else has been able to actually pull it off?
So look, quite honestly, I think if it would have been a lot more financially rewarding to build a service that is specifically geared towards like 1,000 Bitcoin whales than it is to build a service for 10 million people, right? And the reason for that is, like, for example, for Chai, like the average ticket balance that people keep in the app is maybe $50, maybe $100. And that's not a lot of money, right? So even if you gather like 2.5 million people at any time, we're keeping $20, $30 million in sort of like the app, right? Whereas like if you built a bridge to Ethereum from Bitcoin, like for example, Ren, even if like a couple of whales like 3 Arrows Capital liked you, you could, you can move over like $1 billion from Bitcoin to Ethereum, extract, let's say 0.1% rent, which is a lot of money. But like the problem here is that if you don't build something that impacts a lot of people, your position is not defensible and you're not providing lots of value. It's kind of like if you draw an analogy to what's happening in the Middle Ages, like you could become a servant to a couple of noblemen, right? And that would be extremely financially rewarding, but it's a lot more fun and interesting to start a revolution, right? And the peasantry doesn't pay well, but in the longer scheme of things, I think it's more memorable.
But when it comes to the blockchain, doesn't it not really matter how much value, how many coins you're actually transferring, but rather how many transactions? As in, how come Chai Pay is able to keep up with the amount of transactions and at a 6-second finality time, settlement time? How is it able to do that, even if it is a low value for the network? Does it even matter?
It really doesn't. But I think the reason why there aren't more people looking outwards is because the financial incentives are geared towards people that are looking for. It's a lot more financially rewarding to get a couple of devs and launch, let's say, an options market on Ethereum such that it fits into the DeFi stack. So that's rewarding to the tunes of like tens of millions of dollars, even without doing too much work to justify it. If you wanted to run like a payments company or like a synthetic protocol, it takes a lot of resources, and that's because like you need to make sure that you have the proper licensing. You need to make sure channels for partners, for customers. Like you need to make sure that your infrastructure is secure. Unlike DeFi, for a payment service, if you get hacked, you're screwed. You're done. Like you get investigated. You get sued. So just the overhead of trying to build something that is sort of outside the crypto bubble is a lot more difficult, and that's why I think as crypto matures more and more, there's a lot wanting to build something for lots of people that are trickling into the industry now. So I think over the next 6 months or to a year, we're going to have a lot more competition than we did before.
Mm-hmm. And if we're looking, if you're drawing parallels to America, if we're looking at a lot of crypto companies and blockchain companies there, they struggle, or there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to regulation. Either uncertain what the regulation is or will be, or they're uncertain where it will go, because it does seemingly be more heavily regulated, more restrictive. How about on your side, when you're dealing mostly with the Asian markets, South Korea, that area? Do you feel that either the government has been restrictive, helpful? Have they been not involved at all? When it comes to regulators, have you had to go and check with regulators for things, or has it been? What has your experience been over there?
Yeah, so I would say that in most places across the world, with the exception of authoritarian states, financial regulation generally tends to be laxer in almost every other country that is not the US. Right. And maybe that belongs to the list of authoritarian states, but jokes aside, I think for financial regulators in most countries, I think the US is very, very strict, because it's sort of like a cerebral hub of the global financial system, right? So they feel like they need to lay down the law and to set the standard in order for things to work well. I think for most other regulators, for example, like in Korea, for instance, like the financial regulator has an innovation hub. So there are people within the regulatory agencies themselves whose goal and main KPI is to help you succeed. So in a lot of different cases, like if you can prove that you're not trying to scam anyone and that you've truly built an innovative solution that can make something better, there's always going to be people, like even in the densest of organizations, that are looking to help you, especially in the US as well, although on the rails, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very cool. Okay, well, Joe, those are all the questions I have for you. Now's your chance to go and pump whatever you want, pump your network, pump your favorite song, whatever it may be. Go ahead.
No, I don't have too much to pump. It seems like I might have done a lot of that already. But if you guys want to check out some of the things that are happening, really, like easiest to spend, and then class as well with Mirror Protocol, and for us to be able to create stable yield that is attractive on top of our stable coins. And these are respectively our payments operations, Mirror, and Ankr. Make sure to check out our website. I'm always widely available. I would like to check the other things that are happening in DeFi, and look forward to talking with you.
All right, well, Joe, thank you so much. I know that it was very fascinating for me. I'm sure it was fascinating for our viewers as well to kind of get your view. Someone who's really been, in my opinion, super successful, one of the most successful in this space, and actually bringing blockchain technology to the real world and to the people. So once again, I appreciate you taking the time. And for all of our viewers here at REIMAGINE 2021, I'm Yonah Hochhauser. Thanks for watching.